This week on Talking Royals, journalist Emily Andrews joins us to discuss Princess Eugenie opening up on her childhood spinal surgery.
I had back surgery myself, not the same to the extent as Eugenie, but it turned out my surgeon very proudly told me that he'd operated on Princess Eugenie.
She said it quite movingly, it was what her mother taught her, what Fergie taught her. Just be proud of the scar and what you've been through.
What to look out for as the King prepares to head to Canada.
We now know that the Canadian Prime Minister invited the King of Canada. Why would he go now, Chris?
The interesting story next week is with everything that's going on in the White House.
And we take a look back in the archives at how Princess Diana changed the conversation on addiction.
I suggest that we consider what part we can play in the fight against addiction.
The royals know the power of a good speech, but don't use it too much.
And then when they speak, it does make you listen.
Hello, welcome to the show. Chris is here, I'm here, but Lizzie's bailed this week. So we thought we'd do something a little bit special. So we're joined by journalist and broadcaster Emily Andrews. Welcome to our world.
Oh, thanks,
Why
guys.
did we get Emily in? Can you remind us? For detail.
For detail, because Chris isn't very good with the detail.
I do overview.
So
I know a lot about gardening and flowers.
Well, that's perfect. So I did sort of say to Chris, oh no, Lizzie's not going to be here this week. We need to get
You see that
someone
worried
good.
face? Oh,
I was
Lizzie's
like,
not gonna be here.
I definitely can't just do it with Chris because we will get no raw detail whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly.
And he said, I know somebody perfect. Let's get Emily in. And here you are.
go.
So welcome to
You
your
did this
Talking Royals
podcast
debut.
many moons ago, didn't you? When it was in a different studio and a different name, believe you were here.
I did.
One of us.
I think I was either the royal editor of the Sun or the Mail on Sunday. But famously, I did do it here in London, but I also did it. We did it on location
we did.
in Fiji.
In Fiji.
And Shah, it was out in the open. So it was Lizzie, Chris and I. We were all that night we were supposed to be meeting a social with Harry and Meghan. They chucked us off. They'd gone to their private island. So Chris said, come and do the podcast again, but in the open air. And it was quite challenging.
fun.
It was lovely, but it's quite windy.
Yeah.
So
But don't tell Charlene that because she always moans that we get to go on these trips.
I'm not
and
allowed to
stays
go on
here,
location.
so,
it's really, really hard work. I know I say that. It looks like glamour, but
it's really, really hard work.
Yeah, my heart bleeds.
Yeah, but I look at your Instagram and there you are in Dubai and then you're...
I was on holiday.
Okay, so we're not saying you don't travel.
Well, we're going to talk about road travel again towards the end of the programme because Chris and Lizzie are off again. But you did mention gardening, and that was for a reason, because both the King and Queen were at the Chelsea Flower Show this week, weren't they? And they met up with Bex.
they did. Very exciting. So Chelsea Flower Show is on this week. It runs from Tuesday to Saturday, but the Monday of every Chelsea Flower Show is press day, which is kind of more low-key, hoi polloi, like me, aren't allowed in. But
I didn't get allowed in either.
No.
So.
Shocker.
But the press go for a preview to look at all the gardens, and traditionally the royals tend to go at about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock when the press, most of the press have left. And it's a really nice occasion because obviously we have some very famous gardeners in the royal family.
Yes.
We do. And so you had some really good intel about this, which Chris did not.
No surprise.
You just sit there and just smile.
Shall I just
You
not-
sit there and look pretty. Shall I just sit there and look pretty?
Shall I leave the studio and just come back in half an
No,
hour?
because you have your...
Tell us about Canada.
Okay.
Tell us about Canada.
So I'll leave you to it.
David Austin are a very famous and long-time producer of roses. And as part of their work supporting the King's Foundation, which is the King's charitable interests, used to be the Princess Foundation, they have created a new rose and they've named it the King's Rose, and all proceeds from the sale of this rose go to, a percentage of the sales goes to the King's Foundation. So lovely, big tie-up. They've got a stand. They've always got a stand at Chelsea and at the RHS garden shows. And Bex last year was announced as an ambassador for the King's Foundation, and we've seen an increasing kind of loving, shall we say?
We have, yeah.
Between David and
Because
Victoria.
they went to that Italian dinner that
They
they
did.
had
Yes.
in Highgrove,
They
didn't
did.
they? And obviously, Posh and Bex, I think they went to the state banquet. I think I've seen them at
Yeah,
the
I think
banquet.
they
That's
did.
right.
They did.
Yes.
This is all great work if you want to become a sir, I'll just say as an aside.
Let's not mention that story when it was revealed.
If the knighthead were to be in the offing, then he wouldn't be in a bad place for it.
He wouldn't be in a bad place at all. But anyway, I digress.
Some spade work with the gardening metaphors, putting in the spade work. So Beck's appointed an ambassador, and he, there was that story last summer and those lovely pictures of him at Highgrove, and him and Charles bonded over beekeeping at Davos this year. Bex was like, yeah, we've got so much in common. We just love bees and love gardening. At the Chelsea Flower Show, there was Bex, and Charles comes, the king comes and says hello, and he says, oh, my dear chap, lovely to see you. He's there as the King's Foundation ambassador, and he says to Bex, did you get my present? And David says, yes, thank you so much, sir. It was lovely. Mm-hmm. We don't know what the present was at this point, but lovely that the king had sent a 50th birthday present to David. His birthday was the beginning of this month, May. Then
the king missed mine, by the way.
Well, he didn't miss mine.
Did he? Oh, really?
No, I got a card.
Did you?
Yeah, Monday, my birthday, I got a card. Anyway, moving back to Bex and the king. You've got to be nicer. Then
this is a great addition to the team, Chris.
Then the Queen comes along and she says to David, now David is wearing one of these lovely striped roses.
Yeah, we can see it now on the screen. I think,
in his lapel. Very Charles, because Charles loves to wear a buttonhole, a floral buttonhole. And the Queen says to David, oh, you got the roses then. You got the rose. And my inference, David is very discreet, and I think journalists tried to find out afterwards what exactly was the present that was given. He was like, it's a private thing, which is fair enough. But I think it's a fair inference to draw that he was wearing this particular striped rose, King's Rose, in his buttonhole. It's beautiful, by the way. I am going to buy one. Oh no, but the King sent me one too. I think it's a fair...
Kate's got a new rose as well. So
I think it's a fair inference that the King sent David one of these rose bushes.
Yeah.
David's planted it, growing the rose. Kate also has a rose.
Yes.
So are we getting a rose sent from Kay, or are we not on that list yet?
We're going to have them on the sets next week, actually.
Right, okay.
Yes, yeah.
You can't say things that you can't promise are going to happen.
Well, it's happened before, but let's not talk about that.
Sticking with Kate, though, she and Wills did a garden party at Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, so garden parties at Buckingham Palace are actually the King's garden parties, but he's allowed William and Kate to sort of take a lead on the most recent one, which was on Tuesday, and everyone loves a garden party. I have to say, though, when on the odd occasion that I've been to these garden parties, the moment the royals come out is the moment when all the public surge forward to try and get a glimpse of them, take some photos, have a chat with them. That's the moment when us on the rota, who see them quite often, go to the tea tent and raid all the cakes and sandwiches.
Okay.
So it's a good moment. Good tip, if you ever get invited, I'm sure you many times get invited to royal garden parties. Always go to the tea tent when the royals come out. But there was a particularly beautiful moment, and this story means a lot to me because I met the lovely Liz Hatton, who lost her life to that rare cancer, where her mother and her little brother Matteo, who we've spoken to before, were there, and they met William and Kate and just said it was amazing. And actually, her mother, Liz's mother, said it was because of William and Kate and the hug that Kate famously gave Liz that gave Liz a very sort of lovely end of life. She said she lived to the very end, and that's true. And we covered all the things that Liz did, and
because you took her on a tour around the studio.
She even came in here. As I said, we did the interview with her, and I said, "Well, just come in." And then she just loved photographs, and she was in the gallery and clicking away during our lunchtime news.
She had a picture on our main news set with her brother, didn't she?
Yeah, and then I went to her funeral, which was in Harrogate, but there wasn't a funeral in the traditional sense because Liz wanted her body donated for medical research, and they just had all of her beautiful photos. So it was a really nice moment at the garden party. They got to meet the parents.
And what I always find quite nice is they do like to continue those close relationships that they make with members of the public through their work, which is nice to see them continue to keep in touch with people like Liz's parents.
Yeah, I think they meet a lot of people every single day, but there are certain people they meet, or certain families who are going through particularly bad, difficult ordeals, when they will keep in touch, and that sort of longevity is there. You're right.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to them both personally and professionally. So obviously when the Prince and Princess of Wales met Liz and her family at Windsor Castle, I think it was, Catherine, as we now call her, she was still not in the public eye, wasn't doing public duties because of her own cancer diagnosis and chemotherapy. So it wasn't just a typical royal visit. It was cancer someone who's experiencing cancer meeting another fellow traveller on that journey. And, words are, it's difficult almost to find the right words when you're kind of talking about someone who knows that they're stage 4, as Liz, and she knew what was going to happen. But it was evident that you could tell from the pictures that she took that day and the pictures that were taken to document that meeting that the two women found it very moving. And I think it does speak to William and Catherine, as I say, personally and professionally, that they keep those relationships up, because it's very, very important to Liz's family. It was important to Liz that day. She took the pictures, obviously all the stuff that you did, which was amazing. And that meeting, that royal meeting, meant that gave Liz a huge amount of opportunities while she was still alive. Evidently, it brings Liz's family a huge amount of comfort, affection, celebration.
But also keeping her memory alive.
Keeping her memory alive.
And at the risk of breaking a habit of a lifetime and doing detail, actually William found out about Liz through one of his own charities, which was London's Air Ambulance. And actually it was they who told William's household about Liz, and that's how they met her.
Was that how it happened?
And she was invited to take photographs at one of the investitures.
And we're going to move on to Eugenie, because she gave an interview to the Sunday Telegraph this week about her childhood scoliosis surgery. I think the first time I understood this story was it when she got married in 2018 and her wedding dress was designed in a way that the scar could be seen.
Yeah.
And it's really open, she wasn't hiding, what she'd been through.
It was quite the opposite. It was to actually show to be proud of this scar in a way. That was actually, she said quite movingly, it was what her mother taught her, what Fergie taught her, just be proud of the scar and what you've been through. And
she's spoken quite a lot about this in this article, doesn't she? Because she said that she felt shame and embarrassment about having to have the surgery, which all these years later, I'm guessing with her being a parent now, she must understand the importance of making sure that your child doesn't feel those things when they're going through something that they don't have any control over and it's not their fault. Yeah,
and she was actually opening or visiting a garden for a charity called Horatio's Garden, which another sad story. The Horatio is the son of a spinal surgeon who was killed by a polar bear attack in 2011, and the charity was named after him. And just the way in which it described her of walking in. We obviously are used to seeing lots of entourage around the royal family. The photographers, there's a royal rotor for the cameras and the fixed point stand over there, and you stand behind a rope. But this was a very low key meeting, almost like it was.
Well, in some sense, Eugenie's got quite a good position because she's not a working member of the royal family. She's a member, a private member of the royal family, obviously, with her father, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, and her uncle is the king. But she's in that kind of happy space where she has her own job. She works for Art Gallery, House and Worth, but she has her own private patronages. And obviously this charity, Horatio's Garden, it's all about putting gardens into hospitals where there are big spinal units, where people often have to stay for a number of months, 6 months, and the one thing that would be really nice and very helpful for their recovery, mental and physical, would be a garden. I had back surgery myself, not the same to the extent as Eugenie, but it turned out my surgeon very proudly told me that he'd operated on Princess Eugenie for her I think she had to have a number of surgeries for one of the surgeries.
We got you in for a reason. So you're now going to say that I shared the same surgeon as Princess Eugenie.
Wow. I'm not sure he's supposed to tell people that, but
no, I'm not sure. He also told me other people he'd operated on, very high profile, and I thought. Yes. But I don't want to make any comments on orthopaedic surgeons, but I understand that's quite common. They like to sort of they like to say these things, but I do think it's my scar is. It would need a very, very low backed dress to show off my scar, but I thought it was really interesting and positive that she had a V-neck, her wedding dress back, so that she could show her scar. She had to have a number of surgeries for scoliosis of the spine. She had to have a steel rod put down to effectively to the steel rod had to stay beside her spine or beside her spine, and to basically correct the curvature of it for a number of years. And it was she had to have a number of surgeries.
I actually remember now that you having some back issues when we were coming back from the aforementioned Fiji trip and Australia. This was Harry and Meghan's first tour, and we did Fiji, Tonga, New Zealand and Australia, which was a really long 3 weeks, wasn't it? And I remember you having sort of a lot of pain.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, I don't want to sort of say that my experiences is quite as bad as Eugenies, but I couldn't walk after that tour. I couldn't walk for a week. Right. I had to stay horizontal because of the back pain, and that was actually after I'd had the back surgery.
Wow.
Anyway, but it is back surgery is a major thing, and I think the fact that she can do this, have this charity that she's a patron of, Horatio's Garden. She went and visited them at Chelsea on Monday, and they had a garden. They've got a garden currently at RHS Chelsea this week, and I think the garden will then be transplanted to another hospital once the sort of show gardens at Chelsea have gone. And I think I've only met Eugenie once, and she strikes me as a charming, and Beatrice, they strike me as charming, well-adjusted girls who I think do a really good job for the royal family.
Last year, a light touch royal family approach, isn't it?
Last year we saw William calling all the cousins for the garden party when Catherine couldn't go.
Yeah, it's like William's posse, wasn't it? It was that level,
and there's the WhatsApp group. There's the cousins WhatsApp group.
Is there?
History doesn't relate whether Harry is still part of the WhatsApp group.
Got his own unique one.
But it kind of, that sort of thing does humanise them. I've got a WhatsApp group with all my cousins and stuff, and we, pop in and have a bit of a chat and what have you.
You have a private one, and there's a cousin you want to talk about that's...
we definitely also have that. Now, so this is the first time we've done this version of the podcast, Talking Royal. So what we now do is every week we delve into our archive, because we've got loads of archive here at ITN. So we want to start using it a bit more. So we do it on this podcast. And so we look back at certain moments in time at this week, in history. So this week we're going back to May 1989, and we're looking at Princess Diana, because she gave a speech at a conference where she was looking at drug and alcohol addiction and the impact it can have on individuals and on families. And what was really interesting is when she did this speech, she also spoke about the fact that addiction doesn't know class or money. It can affect you if you're poor, it can affect you if you're rich. Let's take a listen.
It is sometimes argued that addicts bring their problems on themselves. But I've noticed that those, such as Turning Point, who have first-hand knowledge of what these problems really are, seem less inclined to pass judgment. Instead, I suggest that we consider what part we can play in the fight against addiction, whether as a parent, a friend, a colleague, or an employer.
This could be, you were saying this earlier, but Chris, this could be at any moment in history that what she's saying there could relate now as much as it did then, but it was rare for someone in the royal family to even begin to touch something like drug and alcohol addiction.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to what Diana did a lot of. If you look at landmines, which at the time she was told she was being too political, if you look at the work that we've discussed on this podcast before that she did on HIV and AIDS, or with taking William and Harry to those homelessness charities, and William is still working on that very subject today, and then just talking about addiction, that it doesn't matter what social class you come from, it can affect everybody. And having someone like Princess Diana say that in 1989, I think really, it was another, to use the phrase of the charities, another turning point, I think, along with all those other causes that I've just mentioned.
And Em, I think one of the reasons why we do go back in this archives, I think it's easy to forget those seminal moments within the royal family historically where their words had real, true impact and changed the opinions of the general public who perhaps had stereotypes regarding things like drug and alcohol addiction.
Absolutely. And I think that you saw Princess Diana choose her causes and her words quite carefully. Famously, she HIV patients, she wouldn't, and leprosy, she would literally touch people to show that you couldn't just, get HIV just by touching someone, that they weren't persona non grata, that she would speak out on occasion. And I think that you see the young royals now, we had Heads Together with Harry, William and Kate take on that kind of mental health and the importance of mental health. And also we've seen Kate in particular pick up addiction in her work with addiction charities. And I think the royals know the power of a good speech, but don't use it too much. So they know.
It's not like a prime minister who makes a speech every single day.
No.
And,
Yeah.
and then when they speak, it does make you listen a lot more.
But if you say the same thing all the time, it lessens the power, it lessens the potency. Yeah. So they choose quite carefully when to say things publicly, when to make those kinds of sort of perhaps social interventions. Because don't forget, they have to be politically impartial. So they can't be sort of saying, do this, do that, government, give more money to that or whatever.
And it was the Conservative government in the sort of mid-1990s that thought that Diana was getting political on landmines. I mean, how can you say trying to stop kids being, losing limbs because of landmines in Angola, how that could possibly be classed as political? But, when you mention about the royals and some of the causes they take on, I mean, I am a particular fan of the work that Queen Camilla has done on domestic violence. We spoke at length about I thought one of the most insightful documentaries I've seen in recent years for members of the royal family was the one she did for ITV recently on domestic violence and abuse.
Not that you're biased.
Not on that,
but by broadcasters.
No, but
it was different.
Let's say it was different. A lot of royal documentaries, are quite sort of sugar coated, shall we say? This was particularly good, I thought, and it was made by an all-female team, all the producers, the editors,
and that would have been
absolutely
a choice.
Of course, and so I think it's really important that it's the kind of thing that Dan had started. Or actually, you could even say Prince Charles started in 1970 when he made his first speech about the environment, and everyone ridiculed him for the next 3 or 4 decades. So they pick their courses carefully, but the ones they choose can bring issues out of the shadows. And the domestic violence is one of those that, the abuse is worse if people don't talk about it, and it does need to be addressed in that way.
You're off to Canada next week, aren't you? Because he's
talking of
going
geopolitics,
their state opening of Parliament under Mark Carney. And as you said before, this wouldn't have been a king decision necessarily. Would it have been a king decision?
The difference with this isn't a state visit because he's going to one of his realms. I mean, we have to repeat this to people in the newsroom, by the way. It's not just people outside the newsroom. That there are 56 members of the Commonwealth, 14 of which, plus the UK, are Commonwealth realms where the king remains the head of state. And Canada is one of those realms. So he's not a visiting head of state. He's going there as the head of state.
The Canadian Prime Minister has invited his head of state, King Charles, as the King of Canada, to go. But I think what is interesting is that
why did the Prime Minister win the election?
Why did the Prime Minister invite the King of Canada to go? Why has the King of Canada said yes? Because I think the Queen, the details, man. I think the Queen only opened. Sorry, the late Queen. I hope I've got this right in saying the late Queen only attended the state opening of Parliament in Canada
twice. State opening once. Parliament twice.
But Parliament twice, and she was.
That was
Queen.
1957. So
exactly.
It was her first visit to Canada, and this as Queen, and this is Charles's first visit to Canada as King, and he will open the state parliament. So there's some history there, but equally,
but for such a record-breaking reign, the Queen only went twice. So, and Carney, I would assume, I don't know, but I would assume Carney would have met Charles when he was Governor of the Bank of England.
Yes. Yeah, they told us at the time they had met previously, and Mark Carney's already been over to Buckingham Palace to see the King for an audience.
So we now know that the Canadian Prime Minister invited the King of Canada. Why would he go now, Chris?
Well, the interesting story next week is with everything that's going on in the White House. And we heard Mark Carney, the new Prime Minister, who won that election on the back of opposition to Donald Trump, largely. We heard him say to Donald Trump in the Oval Office, and lots of things are happening in the Oval Office at the moment, that Canada is not for sale, never, 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 never. I think he said about 5 times. Now, I went with the King and Queen to Canada House, which is the High Commission. That's what the embassies are called when it's in the Commonwealth. And
when it's a realm.
No, I think it's all high. I think I had the same.
When it's a realm, isn't it a High Commission?
Yeah, but it's the High Commission of India, and that's not a realm. So I think it is all Commonwealth countries are High Commissions. You didn't do detail. There's a bit of detail.
I mean, I think this is probably the first time that's ever happened. I'm sat here.
You're
in
shocked.
Yeah.
So I think all the 56 countries of the Commonwealth have High Commissions, not embassies, not just the realms.
It is confusing because we talk about the Commonwealth, and people think that the Commonwealth means that the King is king of those Commonwealth countries, and the Commonwealth is born spun out of the British Empire. So there's obviously a lot, we're not going to talk about that right now, but it is confusing because you kind of think, oh, well, isn't the king of all the Commonwealth countries? No.
Only 14 plus the United Kingdom.
Exactly.
And it used to be 15 because we went to Barbados a couple of years ago when they did the handover.
Exactly. And so you think, but the Commonwealth countries, some of which are also realms, have chosen to be part of the Commonwealth.
And you know, it's a kind of a debate when we were in Australia. We spoke about it then, didn't we? The Australians kind of went, meh. You know, we all thought they'd be over there and saying, why is this man coming over? We want to be a republic.
It wasn't
but everyone kind of went,
clash that we thought. So it'll be interesting to see.
I'd like to see what the Canadians make.
No, I think they're going to get a rapturous.
Because it's a point of difference to the system in America where they have a president, which Canada is currently rallied against.
And we've been to visits to Canada, Chris and I, with the Prince and Princess of Wales. I've been to Canada with the former the Prince of Wales, the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall, Charles and Camilla. And, you know, obviously it's a massive country, Canada. There's obviously big
another bit of detail for you. Second largest country on earth by landmass.
Yes.
But
after which
the royals are pretty popular, I would say. There doesn't seem to be any kind of appetite for a republic there. And also, but it is a bit of a tricky balancing act for the king because he's been invited as the King of Canada, but of course, as the King of the United Kingdom, he has also invited, via our Prime Minister, invited Donald Trump.
And when Mark Carney was asked about this recently, he answered quite bluntly to say, I don't think the Canadians were very impressed with King Charles inviting Donald Trump. So actually...
But he has to as King of the United Kingdom because he has to act for these different...
Because his government, Keir Starmer's government, wants that close relationship with Donald Trump. So there's a lot to speak about. And he's only there for 24 hours, more or less. It's Monday and Tuesday.
Are you going for a bit longer, though?
No, we're going to do the podcast if you're available from whatever location you're in next week.
Yeah,
I think you said recently that you were quite prepared to do it from
I know I'm not going to be in the newsroom. So it depends on whether I want to eat into my half-term time with my kids.
This is true.
And chat to Uncle Chris and Auntie Lizzie, who will be in Canada.
In Ottawa. So it's going to be interesting. So let's just say that, given everything that's going on in the world at the moment.
Okay.
I think it'll be good.
I think it'll be brilliant. Now, before we go, remember we did the Queen's Memorial sketches last week. And we put them up online for people to have a look at and people to chat about to see which ones were their favourites. Ours was the lily pad.
I haven't seen all 5. I've seen a couple.
Yeah, so the lily pad one was the one that both Chris and I really liked.
Yeah, I like that one.
And it
seems that general public or the Talking Royals fans, the lily pad is also their favourite. So Poppy got in touch in email and said, I love the idea of the Queen on horseback as she loves riding. I prefer the JLL Gibbons statue, which was that the lily pad one?
I think there was a statue.
Yeah, in the middle.
But remember we said last week that actually the statue isn't part of these designs. It's an entirely separate project to the actual statue.
Jodie on Instagram said, lily pad design very unique. It will bring in more tourists. Kevin on YouTube, I think most people want to see a statue of the Queen and a visual representation of her. So the lily pad design would probably appeal most. And Heather also on YouTube, the lily pad was interesting. It would be useful for multiple functions. Over on TikTok, Pauline said the one where she's sitting on the horse, although we don't know that's definitely going to be the statue in the middle.
One would imagine. The final
Steve
design.
says, I love the lily pad one. And this came from someone anonymously. I feel like she would have liked something the public can use rather than a statue of herself.
But they all do include a kind of path that links both sides of St James's Park. But you obviously listened to our podcast last week, and you'll know that Lord Robin Janvrin was one of our guests who is in charge of the.
That was a good get. I thought.
So he was a very, very interesting person to talk to, and it's his responsibility to choose. He was so diplomatic about which one. He's clearly got a favourite. He's just not allowed to tell us.
He's just not allowed to say.
And Chris couldn't break him. Oh dear. Emily, I've loved having you on.
Thank you.
Will you come again at some point?
I would love to.
Yeah, we definitely
love you guys.
to have you. Yeah, we kind of chill out, hang out, and chat all things royals.
And I love Chris's detail.
I know.
I think I've proved everybody wrong this week.
You have.
You have.
And actually, Emily was a bit of a trailblazer in the podcast land because I used to listen before Harry and Meghan got married. I used to listen religiously every week to your podcast, which had a fantastic name, which was?
It was On Air. Myself and Omid Scobie had the very first podcast, I think, or Russell might take issue with that, but I don't think Russell was doing the podcast at that point. Russell from The Mirror.
Yeah.
Yours was called?
Ours was called On Air.
But not air.
Hair on hair.
I like that.
And it was just Omid and I was at The Sun at the time, but it was just Omid and I, and he obviously was doing a lot of American stuff. And then we really enjoyed. It was when Meghan just came on the scene. Gosh,
lots to talk about.
A lot of water has gone under that bridge.
Happened since,
and we barely mention it on this show at all. I've got to say, Emily, absolute pleasure. Can't wait to have you back. Chris, I may or may not talk to you through the power of video call next week. I'll see how I feel.
Enjoy the break.
But have a safe flight. And I hope to talk to you about all the Canadian goss on next week's show. That's it for now. We'll be back next week, as I said. Chris and Lizzie will be in Canada, so Liz will be back next week. But remember, you can watch every episode on ITVX and YouTube, as well as listen on your favourite podcast platform. Don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying the show and leave us a review. And if, like the guys who got in touch this week, you want to get in touch with us, you can always email us on talkingroyals@itv.com, or get in touch on TikTok, or get in touch on Instagram. We are wherever you want to contact us, really. Thanks to these two for joining us this week, and thank you to you guys for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.